Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So it's the wildcard team for Game Week 11, and even if you're not wildcarding, hopefully it helps you out with some of your own transfer thoughts moving forward. All the charts are my own, and if you do like the style, please do consider subscribing, liking the video. As a small channel trying to grow, it really does make all the difference. I am recording this before Sunday's games have kicked off, but as always, I'll post alternative players in the comments if there's any injuries. I do discuss different options throughout. All the charts are up until game week 10, so they don't include game week 10 data because not everyone's played in that game week, and I wanted to give an accurate reading as possible. And if some players were included that have already played, kind of gives them an unfair advantage and distorts the data a little bit. So hopefully that makes sense, and we're going to get into the team. It is 94% rated, which isn't the highest rating in the world. It's not going to break any records, but I think we're getting to the stage where you almost have to balance what's already happened with points potential in the future. And sometimes the ratings don't always take that into account. And I could get a couple more percent for a bit more expense, but I like to keep the team around 100 million. So if you have had some of these players for a while and you've got their team value, or if you've got a bit extra money in your budget, you can definitely upgrade somewhere and that'll probably give you a couple extra percent. But I like this to be accessible for everyone. So into the goalkeepers, and I've gone for Sanchez from Chelsea. And really, the fixtures do look pretty good in the near future. He's not, set any points records or pulled up any trees for his performance so far this season. But again, it's one of those predictions for the future, and his points per game are quite low. But that also includes a game where he got a -3 for getting sent off. And if Chelsea as a whole can just keep 11 players on the pitch for a consistent basis, I do think their form will turn around and they will start just being a lot more solid overall, and therefore the clean sheets will come. He's a good cheap way into the Chelsea defence, and he's also a million cheaper than someone like a Raya. So if you can afford a Raya, that's great. But if you wanted to invest the money elsewhere, or maybe your team value isn't great, I think he is a really good option. When we take a look at the chart, we can see expected goals conceded per 90 versus saves per game. Sanchez is currently about here. Now, he's not setting himself apart from the group, really, in terms of the data. But I think he is someone that is conceding fewer saves than most. So the fact that he is in the lowest saves, or the fourth lowest for saves, out of every goalkeeper that's played so far this season, you might look at that and say, well, he's not going to get the save points. But when we talk about this previously, I'm not a huge fan of goalkeepers who are making lots of saves because that means the opposition are getting a lot of shots. And that's not really sustainable for clean sheets if the opposition are getting chances. These goalkeepers, they're not going to make endless saves forever. So I would much rather have a goalkeeper that is making less saves and therefore is playing for a team that is more likely to keep a clean sheet. And out of the goalkeepers to the left of this line, Sanchez is easily the cheapest option. Now, anyone that's under this line is expected to concede less than one goal per game. So we can see here that Raya and Donnarumma are probably the best goalkeepers to have in FPL right now, which isn't a surprise. You don't need to tell me to tell you that Raya is the best goalkeeper right now, but they are more expensive, and someone like a Sanchez, I do think, is going to score well in the next few game weeks. So into defence, and we have to have Gabriel really. I think if you haven't got him in your team already, it's still not too late. I know sometimes it's a bit difficult when a player has gone up in price and they've scored a load of points, but you just need those players in your team. And if you've already got him, that's great. You'll have enjoyed getting his massive 8.1 points per game so far this season across 10 game weeks, which is just incredible, really. I've gone for Timber as the double Arsenal defence. I think because Arsenal aren't going to keep clean sheets forever, the fixtures, they're not getting difficult, but there's definitely potential in there for goals conceded. I think having some defenders rather than Riot does just give you that extra avenue for points for the price. Because let's say Arsenal do concede in the next two game weeks, all of a sudden they're looking really expensive. So I think having two defenders that are so attacking, and you could also add Calafiori into this as well as a slightly cheaper option than a Timber. But I do think you need a Gabriel. I've also gone for Senesi in this team, and that's really because so many people will own Senesi already, trying to make this team realistic to you guys. So if you already own Senesi, it's not worth transferring him out, I don't think, even on a wild card, because he's just got so much value tied up in him, and he's just as good as any other defender, really. He leads the way in defensive contributions, as we'll see in a second. And I think that just means his baseline points is just that bit higher than everybody else. Rodon and Mukiele make the bench. I just think there's no need to go for much more of an expensive defender. You could, if you have a bit more budget, add in a Crystal Palace defender, say. I do think that their fixture schedule does mean that clean sheets are going to be more difficult to come by. So when we take a look at this chart here with expected goals conceded per start versus defensive contributions per start, we can see that Arsenal defenders are just head and shoulders above everyone else for these expected goals conceded. Now, Gabriel is the best for defensive contributions, and then you have got Timber as the next one. Calafiori is way down there, but Calafiori is someone who is getting subbed a little bit early for Arsenal, which does mean that his defensive contributions are a bit lower. And you might think that's not great, but because he's being subbed earlier, does mean that he's banking that clean sheet. And therefore, if Arsenal did concede a goal late on, Calafiori would still get those points. So it's not the end of the world when you put it into the context of the minutes they're getting. But what about the rest of the defence? Well, anyone to the right of this line is essentially getting you 10 defensive contributions per game and those extra 2 points. They're close enough to 10 defensive contributions that more often than not, they're going to hit it. They're averaging nine, say, nine or above. So, really, any of the defenders that are in my squad are ranking here. So, we can see Senesi and Mukiele are really good defensive contribution options, especially for the price. Someone like a Mukiele and again, a Rodon who is close enough to about nine defensive contributions per game that he will be getting those extra 2 points more often than not. And of course, there are better defenders in there who are maybe going to score that more consistently, but they're more expensive. So where is the good value? And you can't start everybody every week. So if you're going to have one or two defenders on your bench most weeks, you don't really want your team value to be tied up in them, and the cheaper options are better. Now, anyone below this line is averaging 1.5 or below goals conceded per game, which might seem like quite a lot, but when you combine that with good fixtures, I think is worth a look. Some defenders might be conceding a lot of goals, but if they've played difficult games, maybe played a Man City or an Arsenal in the season already, have a look at their next few fixtures and try and put a bit more context around why that would be. So anyone who is sort of in this rectangle or square here is a good defender to get in on a free transfer if you combine it with the fixtures. So feel free to pause the video at any point to take a look at the chart in a bit more detail. But we move on to the midfielders, and I've gone for Declan Rice here. So a little bit of a shake-up in midfield. So the defence was quite similar to last game week's wildcard team, which kind of makes sense. I don't want to just be making changes for the sake of it every week in a wildcard team if I think the players from last week are still relevant. But Declan Rice, I think, is probably worth over Raya at the moment. He is the Arsenal sort of midfielder slash attacker I would be going for in my own team. I just think Gyökeres is maybe injured and also just not necessarily don't know whether he's worth the price when you look at someone like a Mateta and a Haaland up front. I don't think I'd get Gyökeres over either of them on a wild card. And Saka is just too expensive right now for the minutes that he's playing and the chances that he's getting. Declan Rice is on set pieces. He does offer defensive contributions and he is starting pretty much every game. And he's getting you 6 points per game, which is a really good return. I've also gone for Gakpo. I think because Salah will be going to African Cup of Nations in about 4, 5, 6 game weeks. Getting Gakpo in now will get you ahead of the curve, and it is possible that he scores points in the meantime. Semenyo is a bit like Senesi, someone that if you've had in for a while, you've got a lot of value tied up in him. And whilst that shouldn't be the be all and end all for your decisions, I just think even at 8.1 million, it's not really worth transferring him out on a wild card because he's still a great pick. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether you've got value or it costs a lot. If you've got a player that's going to score you points, that is the ultimate aim. And then I've gone for Caicedo as a bit of a cheaper option. I think when you balance someone like him and Enzo Fernandez up, you are sort of splitting hairs 50-50 in terms of their attacking output at the moment. And whilst Caicedo isn't going to get you endless amounts of attacking returns, he is again someone who is going to get you those defensive contributions. And therefore, when he does get an attacking return, he gets you 10 points, like this game week. So Josh King is also on the bench just as a cheap option. I think you have to cut costs somewhere if you do want, an overall midfield that is a little bit more expensive. But like I say, the Caicedo Enzo Fernandez problem, it really is the fact that Caicedo is a million cheaper. If the point split isn't that much different, like if Enzo Fernandez is scoring one or two more points over the course of a season on average, I think having Caicedo a little bit cheaper, if it means you can get in an extra Arsenal player for the cost, is worth that difference. So when we take a look at the midfielders here, again, expected goal involvements versus defensive contributions per start, what I'm trying to show are which midfielders offer good value and point scoring on both sides of the ball. So we can see, again, anyone to the right of this line is getting those 12 defensive contributions for a midfielder, and Caicedo is head and shoulders above the rest. I wouldn't necessarily, unless it is Caicedo, say, get in a midfielder for just the defensive contributions because 12 is a lot. Not a lot of midfielders are hitting that on a regular basis. Anyone who is averaging more than that, I think, is pretty solid. I just think it's so difficult for a midfielder to get that on a regular basis. So when we take a look at the rest of the midfield, now Josh King isn't in this chart because it's just for midfielders 5 million and above, because I feel like they're the ones that are worth discussing. And otherwise, the chart just gets too busy. So he is also just a cheap option, and you can replace him with anyone else if they're going to be third on your bench. Rice, Semenyo, and Gakpo are doing pretty well in terms of expected goal involvements. Now, Gakpo especially, I just think isn't being talked about a lot and is someone that is expected to be involved in a lot of goals. He's probably underperforming right now. He's not going to get you defensive contributions, but he is someone that's 7.6 million, a really good sort of mid-tier price. And if you're on a wildcard, I would make the move. He is the sort of player that you're not necessarily going to get in on a free transfer necessarily because he doesn't seem like a priority pick. You've got maybe more exciting players like an Mbumo. You've also got a lot of other midfielders like Anthony Gordon around that price that people are talking about right now. And I think Semenyo is a good option as well. Expected goal involvements, he's definitely overperformed them so far this season, so I would expect that to drop off. But again, it's the sort of player if you already own, he's worth keeping hold of. And Declan Rice, again, might look like he's just in the middle of the group here. When you actually pause the video and take a look at the players around him, a Paqueta, a Grealish, Foden. I do think that, whilst a Minter might be a good pick that's just above him, I think for the price, he's definitely worth considering. But again, that's maybe one of the picks that is personal preference, and you could go for someone else around him in the data here. So on to the forwards, and I'm sticking with João Pedro. He's actually back into this wildcard team. A lot of people have transferred him out. Me personally, I did keep him in my own team, and he'd scored this game week and got 3 bonus points to go with it. And it's really just the fact that if you're on a wildcard, I would get him in. If you've just sold him in game week 10, I wouldn't buy him back in right now. I don't necessarily think it's worth a free transfer. But when you look at those next two fixtures of Wolves at home and Burnley away, if you had unlimited transfers this game week, I could see a case to get him in. And then at game week 13, maybe you sell him for a Thiago or a Voltemade, or maybe just a cheap forward and you upgrade your bench. I think he is worth getting in for these next two game weeks and just seeing how it goes and then making the move to sell him. Other than that, I think Mateta and Haaland are just the two obvious forwards right now. And they're the ones we had in this team last week. So apologies for not making it different, but it would have just been for the sake of the video rather than who I genuinely think. And I genuinely think Mateta and Haaland are just head and shoulders above all the other forwards right now. And we can see that in the chart here. So goal contributions versus expected goal involvements. It's a regular chart that we show on the channel, and I think it's just the best one for forwards. Here, again, we can see the line of best fit where if someone falls on this line, it means they're hitting their expected goal involvement. So someone is expected to get 3 goals, say, and they're actually getting 3 goals. Anyone to the right of this line or underneath it, and they're overperforming their expected goals. And that does mean that over the course of the season, players do gravitate to closer and closer towards the line. So anyone sort of further away underneath the line means that they are less likely to be returning in the near future. And I do agree with that sort of sentiment. And then everyone who is to the left or above this line, they are underperforming their expected goals, and that does mean they're likely to be scoring in the near future. So here we can see Mateta and Haaland are just head and shoulders above the rest for expected goal involvements. Whether they're scoring or not, they're just creating the most chances. And I think because Mateta is underperforming his expected goals, he's just such an easy get in right now. And Haaland is just having so many chances that he's going to be scoring points. It's a bit like what we said earlier in the video, the end of the day, it's who is also scoring the most points. And someone who's getting that many chances is eventually going to score no matter how the form is. We can see João Pedro is currently down here. And again, whilst it's not a good long term pick, if you isolate the next two game weeks and you're on a wild card, I think it's totally viable to get him in. But if you were on a wild card and you didn't want that, you can just downgrade him to someone else or just straight swap him to a Voltamada or use that extra cash to upgrade your bench. So, overall, the strengths of this team are the short term fixtures. I think all of these players have good fixtures in the short term, as well as the forwards, I think, are really strong as well. The weaknesses for me, however, are the bench. I think it's a weak bench, although there is a certain amount of strength in these cheap defenders. I can understand if you were to look at it and say, goodness me, am I going to bench boost anytime soon? And if you don't have a bench boost, or sorry, if you haven't used your bench boost yet, then I think that is a little bit of a problem. And maybe this isn't the team for you, and you would downgrade João Pedro and upgrade your bench. There's also no Newcastle in this squad either, which I do think is a little bit of a weakness. I think that is, something that is lacking. Maybe a defender or a Voltamada or even an Anthony Gordon if you wanted to do instead of Gakpo in the short term, get Anthony Gordon in and then do a swap later on when Liverpool's fixtures change a bit easier. I think that is a good option as well. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you've got any questions as well. Always good to chat FPL. Please do consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.